Welcome to week 3 of SETSIG's small open online course on Universal Design for Learning and Apps. This week, Tim Frey, Associate Professor of Special Education at Doane College, discusses the UDL principle of multiple means of representation, and he shares a number of examples of how he has implemented this principle with tools such as the built-in accessibility features of the Mac, Diigo, and Nearpod. Following the webinar recording, your instructors, Luis and Kendra, will share some instructions and next steps for how you'll proceed with this week's activities. Without further delay, here's Tim discussing the UDL principle of multiple means of representation.
My name is Tim Frey, and I'll be your presenter for today. We're going to focus on the UDL principle of multiple means of representation. In my experience as an associate professor at Doane College in special education, preparing pre-service teachers to work with students with all kinds of learning needs, this is one of the most important things that they can take away from the idea of universal design, is how to share their content in a way that meets the needs of all those students. So here with you from Nebraska, we'll begin looking at this principle. Multiple means of representation is one of the 3 key principles of universal design for learning. The idea behind this principle is that learners are different in the way that they perceive and comprehend content. For them, for example, people with sensory disabilities or learning disabilities or language or even cultural differences require many different ways to approach the content. Others may simply just grasp information quicker or more efficiently through a visual or auditory means rather than a printed text. Also, the transfer of learning occurs when multiple representations are used because it allows students to make connections within as well as between concepts. In short, there's not one means of representation that will be optimal for all learners, but providing multiple means of representing content is essential to provide accessibility for students with different learning needs. In summary then, the goal of this principle is to provide multiple representations of the content and remove as many accessibility barriers as possible for the learners as they process information and gather it into usable knowledge. Those barriers can be as simple as things like not having written instructions for an activity, or as complicated as trying to sort and categorize information from a large data set. The idea behind this principle is based on our understanding of how the brain functions. As you learned in the first weekly overview of universal design, there are different networks in the brain related to different areas of information as we try and work with students in their learning. Multiple means of representation intentionally targets the strategic recognition networks in the brain. Those are the networks that focus on how we perceive things and how we take information in and sort it and categorize it in our brain. It really focuses on the what of the learning that's going on in the classroom. Some examples of strategic network include learning-related tasks that are gathering information. That could be through seeing, through hearing, or through touching things. And they include the things we do often in classrooms and online, like reading text and symbols, interpreting images and visuals, and categorizing and sorting the information into identifying patterns. All kinds of subject areas like music and math, language arts, social studies, and science are built on the idea that we can categorize and sort the information that we're taking in the learning environment. Key representation targets include multiple options for perception, multiple options for representing expressions and symbols, and multiple options for comprehension. The example of the picture on this slide is all about perception. And without a label to add a multiple means of representation, it's difficult to tell whether this is a duck or a rabbit. Personally, I've always thought it was a rabbit. But without that label and that text representation as well, our brain has to categorize it however we can. We'll also look at similar examples for representing expressions and symbols and helping students sort and comprehend the information that they're gathering in the learning environment. So we're going to look at 3 different examples of multiple representations of content. And the first example we'll look at during this webinar is the use of text-to-speech features. You can find a great example of a text-to-speech feature when you look at the video on the Voice Dream Reader that was recorded by SETSIG last year. So take a look at that. Really good information on one program. Another thing that you'll find that's a really great text-to-speech feature is the accessibility features on the Macs and also on the iPad. You can find a full video of that also in part of this class and last year when Luis Perez did a webinar demonstrating some of those features. So let me quickly review what that looks like for you, because this is a thing that you can do in your classroom for any student with anything that's a PDF or a text file or an HTML file for your classroom content. So you can see on the screenshot that in the preferences of the Mac, you go to System Preferences and then choose the Speech Tools, and then there's an option for text-to-speech at the top. You can select the voice and the rate of speed that the text will be read, and I like to change the key command on these so that my students understand when they're using the computer where to find it really easily, and I make Command R because that reminds me it's for read. So whenever they click Command R, they know it'll read the text to them right off the screen. The example then on the screenshot from the CAST website, whenever you highlight the text and click Command R, the computer's operating system will then read out loud the text to that person. So a lot of uses for this in the classroom. Things like students researching articles online that are above their reading level or that are difficult to access. Also, we use this to allow students to have directions read or to even have students have assessments read so that the computer can be an objective reader and give audio representation to the content that's only in text. Websites, again, PDFs, and anything that's in a text document like a Word document or a Pages document can be read out loud really simply. This is a great way to represent content with audio instead of just text on the screen. The next example that I want to share with you is that of the multiple representations, and we're going to use an app or look at an app called Nearpod. This is particularly important. We talk a lot in universal design about how we can change the representation, but there's more to it than just adding extra senses. It's also about how fast our brain processes information as we're gathering it in our senses and how it stores and organizes it. And so one of the things that I found to be really effective for students, especially students with learning disabilities or students who are struggling to access text content, is to change the timing, or what I would call change the synchronicity of the content being presented. And Nearpod is just one app that has some features that could allow you to do that. A couple of screenshots, and then we'll see if we can go into this live. Nearpod, you can find the app online. There's a free version, and it allows you to create presentations that then are shared on an iPod or an iPhone or even an Android device now. And to do this, you create an account and then head in to Nearpod. There are several advantages to having the presentation on an iPod rather than up on a screen. This is, of course, one of the most common ways we represent content in a classroom or even in a webinar is by having the information on the screen right in front of us. A large screen far away, though, is different for a lot of students than having their own personal screen right in front of them. In fact, I'm going to back up to look at that picture. If you see the picture on this slide of the students with the computers and iPads right in front of them, Nearpod allows you to present the content directly to that person's desk or that person's space, or sometimes even where students are working in small groups. So the content is right in front of them, and the best part is they can manipulate it at their own pace, especially things like videos and activities that you can embed in your Nearpod presentation. So this screen is a basic outline of what the Nearpod tools look like. And on the next screen, you'll see how to add content. The options in Nearpod are variable. You can include slides that can be PDFs or PowerPoints, videos, audio podcasts, or slideshows. And then the best part is it allows for interactivity so that you can include tools in your presentation in the way that you're representing the content that allows students options, for example, to draw what they're representing the content with, to ask questions or take polls about the content as they're going through it, and even to respond to reading questions or comprehension questions about something they might be using to read or gather information during the presentation. So we'll try and take a look now live at how to build or what a Nearpod presentation looks like when it's completed. So this is a look at my Nearpod site, and we'll look at a couple examples from the presentation side, from the teacher side. Here's an example that I've made for this webinar, and you can see it's just a few short slides of presentation that include some text, an image, a web link to a video, and then some quiz questions at the end. And one of the things that we're using this for consistently in classrooms of students that I'm working with is basic reading comprehension and reading groups, if you will, but each person has their own reading group then in this case. So the student has text to read in this initial slide, and then also has an image and then a web link that has, in this case, a picture of a moving hummingbird that you can follow along with the standard questions at the end for reading comprehension. And so each student has a personalized reading text at their level, and then an interactive opportunity to get the information from the text in multiple ways, and then the assessment at the end to look at that. So if we preview this, you'll see that it looks just like a regular slide presentation with the image and then the web link. And students would view these right at their desk at their iPod, and then these are the questions from the teacher perspective. There's some advantages to this in that it can be used for lots of content. One of the things I also like to use Nearpod for is for mathematics, where we can have visual images and even active videos capturing either a student's drawing out problems, making models of the problems with visuals like learning blocks, and continuing to make connections and organizing information. So that's just a brief overview of Nearpod. If you go to Nearpod, the main site, you'll see there are opportunities to get engaged in webinars, just learning Nearpod. It's very user-friendly and an excellent way to get your students involved in a universal design way to represent content. So Nearpod presents multiple opportunities, including students' opportunities to draw and share their understanding, to make notes, and to interact with the information at their own pace, which is something unique. When I use Nearpod, one of the things that's important is for students each to have their own set of headphones as well for the presentation, because they move through the content. When there's audio, they can pause and back up the video or audio and listen to it over and over as they're getting the information from the text or from the video. That change in synchronicity is what makes Nearpod a valuable resource in my classroom. Nearpod lessons, again, can be used for reading or mathematics, and especially the synchronicity of the video and audio components that provide opportunities for students who process information at different speeds to adjust that themselves and be in control of the learning that meets their needs. So a third example I'm going to share with you that represents content in multiple ways is a text highlighter and annotation tool called Diigo. This is a popular tool, especially at the secondary level, for students who are working with text that's online. It could be a textbook online, it could be information in articles and content, and also even potentially assessments and things of that nature. Diigo is a tool that allows students to organize and use some of the standardized tools that we used to let them use on paper in an online or HTML environment. And the specific ones include the highlighter and the sticky note are some of the primary tools in Diigo. So when we look at Diigo, this is a screenshot of one of the online CAST modules, and the Diigo tools are up in the top right-hand corner. Diigo is an add-on to your browser. It works best with Chrome, and is a pretty effective way to be able to allow students to interact with text. So not just have it read aloud, but to highlight keywords and organize the information that's part of the content. That part of the comprehension part of the multiple means of representation principle is a really key in students as we work to help them recognize ways to organize content. So you can see on this page, on this web page, I was able to go through and highlight each time it talked about recognition networks with my yellow highlighter. I can create a sticky note and talk about the key focus of the areas. Teachers can also use this to mark up HTML text before the students read it. So one of the things that I like to do is help my students identify what some of the key areas are that I'm looking at in articles or web pages or resources I may assign to them to read. And so I'll go through and identify those parts with different colors of highlighter, and by putting some sticky notes in that might help them focus on a key area. We also talk a lot about chunking strategies when students are gaining text information. This is a great way to help students chunk information by requiring or encouraging them to produce sticky notes for each paragraph or each section of a text reading that's provided online. That strategy has helped build notes and help students organize and identify key areas of content. So in summary, representing content in multiple ways is a key to universal design. We want each unique learner to have more opportunities to gather information and make connection within and across the content that's being presented. We hope you gained a lot of information from this particular webinar and that you'll use the tools that are both built in your computer and they're added on, like Diigo and Nearpod, to connect with your students and provide universal design for learning in your classroom and school.
A big thank you to Tim for this excellent presentation on the UDL principle of multiple means of representation and the great examples that he has shared to help you implement this principle in your classrooms. Now that you've watched the webinar, please make sure to click on the Representation tab of the course website at www.setsig.com for a list of this week's tasks as well as some additional resources that will help you explore the UDL principle of multiple means of representation in more detail. Also remember that on Tuesday we'll be having an open office. This is an informal time where you can ask any questions that you have about the course content. And if you have any questions at any time, please make sure to email Luis or Kendra at setsig@gmail.com. We appreciate your involvement in this course, and we hope that you're finding it to be a valuable resource for expanding your understanding of universal design for learning.